Thank you,
Thanks.
Heather. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure. I wanted to say and I know it's February, but because it is the first Tarragon Talk of the new year, I did want to say Happy New Year. Thank you for being here, and I'm so overjoyed that you're here to join us on this beautiful Sunday with these two incredible artists and artistic leaders and creators of the show you're going to see today, Martin Julien and Brian Quirt. It is my immense pleasure to give them a little introduction. I printed off their bios to make sure I captured their full accomplishments, but I will also be sure to not read out everything to make it hard. But these are incredibly accomplished artists. For Tarragon specifically, Martin has been here in this building as a performer and other roles in Mimi, A Poisoner's Comedy, The Whirlpool, of which Brian also adapted and directed, and It's All True as a performer. Just a few years ago, there was a beautiful show at Buddy's that Martin also was a part of creating, The Man That Got Away, directed by Peter Hinton, another familiar name here at Tarragon, and amongst many things, 3 Dora Mavermore Awards, a PhD from University of Toronto, and a beautiful note from your bio that I wanted to share was that this production is dedicated to the memory of Martin's middle school choir teacher, Anne Christdale, who nurtured in him a deep love for the human singing voice, which I found beautiful.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Martin. And then Brian Quirt, who is someone I am hugely indebted to in my own artistic life. He has been a mentor, a dramaturg of incredible prowess across North America and globally, and also just a wonderful man. For the Tarragon, like I mentioned, The Whirlpool, which he directed and adapted, An Acre of Time, which he directed, and most recently, during our Greenhouse Festival 2 seasons ago, These Are the Songs That I Sing When I'm Sad, which was performed by Jane Miller, who you'll also get to see today in The Wolf and the Voice. Other credits include Brian Quirt being the artistic director of Nightswimming Theatre, a really mighty commissioning and performance company in Toronto. They're touring These Are the Songs That I'm Singing, that I Sing When I'm Sad in St. John's, Newfoundland. He's adapting Kenneth Opel's The Nest, and he is also a 2-time recipient of the LMDA's Elliott Hayes Award for Outstanding Achievement in Dramaturgy, and in 2023 received the LMDA Lessing Award for Lifetime Achievement in Dramaturgy. Welcome to our 2 creators of
Jeff.
Wolf and the Voice.
And in keeping with Martin's dedication, this show is not dedicated to my grade 3 teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who told me basically that I couldn't sing. I just wanted to be clear that it's not dedicated. To her. No.
I see. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you,
But you bring up her name in vengeance.
But it feels fair.
It's beautiful. To start us off, I wanted to speak about The Wolf in the Voice, sort of the namesake of this. From the program bio, there's a beautiful nod to how, Brian, you discovered it in an Icelandic crime novel, thriller novel?
Yes, so the title, or the phrase, The Wolf in the Voice, I bumped into in a beautiful novel called Voices, appropriately, which has a subplot about a boy soprano whose voice cracks or breaks in a huge and important performance in Iceland as part of the action of the novel. And in the discussion around that and the repercussions that it has for the boy, who by the time the story takes place is an adult, but the devastating effect that it had of doing it in public with a huge audience at a moment that had been built up for a variety of reasons that are told more fully in the novel, and just the crisis that it leads for this person, for this young man. And the voice, the Wolf in the Voice seemed like such a great phrase, and Martin and I had already started talking about this show and had the idea that it would explore the vocal break and look at the idea of a trio. But I don't think we'd actually started investigating it in studio with actors yet. I can't quite remember exactly. But this phrase leapt out of that book, and it just felt like it captured something that maybe could be a title, and it just stuck. And We spent a lot of time researching stories around wolves from all over the world, none of which is in the show. But we spent many, many weeks and months, and several interns prior to Jeff at Nightswimming did a lot of voluminous research on, ancient wolf stories and legends, all of which were fascinating and not strictly relevant, as is often the way in creating a new work. But anyway, it's called Voices. It's a beautiful novel as part of a series set in Reykjavik.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, and I would tell you the name of the author, but
yes,
like so many Icelandic names, it's long and complicated. So you can look it up, I'm sure.
Thank you, Brian. As part of our Tarragon talk today, I did a lovely deep dive into sort of Nightswimming, Martin, and Brian's history of developing works around the human voice. And so a lot of this talk today will revolve sort of a historical and archival look at some of the early works they worked on and how that evolved into The Wolf and the Voice, to which you're going to see today. And part of that comes down to the nature of Nightswimming being a dramaturgical company. One of the first things that Brian mentioned when we spoke about dramaturgy almost 10 years ago was the difficulty in defining dramaturgy. And so I wanted to ask Brian, through Nightswimming's views, what has been this track record and analysis of the human voice, and how has that evolved through Nightswimming, through your time there?
I've always been interested theatrically in shows that I directed even before Nightswimming, and in incorporating choral speaking, so performers speaking together or in unison or as groups, and sometimes in classical theater that we've worked on. The Greeks obviously used choruses in a very particular way, so that was part of my interest. And how the musicality of that, it might not be music if you're speaking chorally, but it is musical in the sense. So I was interested in that, how that heightens the delivery of text on stage, and how it heightens and changes how you hear certain parts of whatever is shared by performers on stage. As Nightswimming started to evolve, I had Nightswimming as a dramaturgic company, so we commission and develop pieces and then look for partners like the Tarragon to ultimately produce them. So it gives us a lot of freedom because we don't have a theater. We don't have to market the shows that we sell and bring them to audiences. So we don't have a responsibility for the final phase of the process. So it allows us to explore very widely at the beginning of when we start to create shows. It provided me an opportunity to pursue this interest I had in singing and how heightened aspects of speaking on stage could be deployed in different stories, and how they could assist and support how we as audiences hear stories and how we understand what characters are doing, and through other tools, just not beyond speaking. But I don't have much interest in musicals. Field is so well developed, and it's so precise, and it's so specific, and there are people who are experts in it that I'm not. We've only done one musical, but even that was an a cappella musical, because I was interested in, what if you did a musical with no musicians except singers, and how hard would that be? And everyone said, that's really hard, actually. But I'm not a musician, so part of my interest in this is bringing musical questions to the fore, without being able to answer them. Right. Because my instinct was, an a cappella musical, maybe that's hard to sing. And people go, yeah, it's really hard to sing because you're dependent only on the other singers. There's no other no other musicians or instruments to facilitate and support the music. So I said, then that's fascinating. How do we do that? Like, how do you create an a cappella musical? And how do you develop it? And how do they actually do it on stage? So we did. And that fed a lot of these explorations, as did some of the work I did, or Martin did with us, in a research project also about the human voice. And an artist named Kate Hennig, who contributed to The Wolf and the Voice, who also did a research project with us about the human voice. And those two projects, Martin and Kate's, I think really helped direct or redirect some of our interests, or my interests anyway, into how could we not just use these devices to tell other stories, but actually make them the story, which is kind of what has happened with Wolf and the Voice and some of the other pieces. Music and how people sing is the story that we're exploring.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And thank you for bringing that nod to peer research. As a bit of context, Nightswimming has evolved a program of research, creative research, along practice, but also within different academic settings. And as part of one of the 2003 peer researches, Martin actually took on board a project around the human voice, music, and narrative. And I wanted to read a quote that you had in your, I think this is the post-research article. It might be interesting to see some work that looks even more specifically at live singing in contrast to both instrumental and recorded music. According to some theorists, voice exists precisely at the threshold between self and world, center and periphery. This seems an idea rich with theatrical possibility. A singing voice radiating outward to others invites, insistently, that they attend to and participate in it and the life it represents. And that quote to me speaks so much to what you just said around how the music is the story, or the way to craft a show might be, and a different look at it. And Martin, I wanted to ask, what was some of the discoveries you made in your peer research that led to some of the work you did on Blue Notes together, and then to The Wolf and the Voice?
Wow, it's so interesting to hear something I wrote 22 years ago. About that sounds like a pitch, actually. Just
Wow.
so the research
Sort of
Let's
worked.
do a play. We worked with two singers for the period of, I don't know how long it was. It was
3 or 4 days, I think.
I think it was even more, maybe.
Maybe.
At any rate, we worked with space, we worked with time, we worked with songs mashing up against each other. We looked at tuning and the mathematics of intervals, and we did it in space, you know, with actors moving at various segments across a floor was one of the things we did. And you can even see an extension of that, not to give it away, in The Wolf and the Voice, in terms of actors negotiating and navigating space through notation and vocalizing. So we did that. We would throw various kinds of songs and stories together in various ways, sometimes centering the story and having the song surround it, sometimes the story being kind of mysteriously in the background and weaving in and out. And the great thing about peer research, it was all oriented towards curiosity and exploration. There was no point to get anywhere. Okay, now let's nail this down. Oh, that was interesting. So it was very, very new program at that point. I think it might have even been the first year.
Yeah.
So that I applied and got accepted to be one of the first explorers in that. So it was a very lively room, that's for sure. And I came to realize that Brian, even though Brian identified as a non-singer and as you said, a non-musician, was really intrigued and very responsive and smart about the observations in the room. So I went, well, this is an interesting combination between the two of us. And again, we'd known each other for several years. But that was a new relational discovery, and you know, I came from a background where there was just like singing around my house all the time, and I've been singing my whole life, you know, both for fun and professionally. So we had these very, very different backgrounds, but then so there was this kind of interweaving of our sensibilities that provided a really exciting discourse around it. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. It dawns on me that, in a way, you come together as your own ensemble too. This discovery and or pairing of this sort of difference in musical lifestyle and how you've come together to both work on these pieces together. Because in many of the pieces afterwards, both in Blue Notes, a piece that was around an 8-person ensemble choir, but only 7 performers on stage, mourning the grief, coping with the death of their 8th member, and then in Wolf of the Voice, a pair of 3. So ensembles is something that's always core to the work of your musical exploration. And so I was curious, for this piece, how was the assemblage of this ensemble over the years and today?
Well, some of the decisions we made when we started working together on these pieces around music two things that sort of set this kind of, which took us months to figure out, but in summary, we said we would not try to make anything into being a play, like meaning a scripted play, unless it really wanted to be that, and that we would only work on it in rehearsal hall or in studios with artists. So when we had the idea for this show, which, so we did a show called Blue Note, which was about an 8-person ensemble with 1 person missing. And we enjoyed that so much that we said, let's keep working together. What else in the musical realm would be interesting for us? And I said I wanted to explore a very large choir. And so we created a show where the audience, the entire audience becomes a choir during the show and sings. And we did it in various places around Toronto and elsewhere in the city. And then Martin's...
In the country.
And the country, yeah.
Like
We
Calgary,
toured it to a number of places. And then simultaneously, Martin proposed a show about trios and about the break. And so the only way to kind of work on these shows about music, rather than sitting around typing them out, is to get in a room with performers. And so in each of those cases, it's like, let's just start. We made a kind of a commitment way back that we just had to start and bring in performers, and you're guessing at that time about who are the right people. I don't know, but we decided we would not worry about guessing and just do it. And so we invited 3 people into the first Wolf in the Work session for, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 days. One was an opera singer, so we knew we wanted people with disparate and very different experiences in training and sort of commitment as singers. So one was trained as an opera singer who eventually evolved into musical theater. One was Jane Miller, who you will see today, who's been in all the sessions all the way through. We held on to her, whose background is in pop music with a little bit of music theater, but really she's a pop singer in so many ways and had been in a band and many other things. And the other, Mika Barnes, well, he's also a singer, but it comes from other very different traditions. And we've then just made up a bunch of experiments, basically, in our time with them. Try singing this, and try singing this, and what if you do these things together? And Martin would do so musically, and I would do so non-musically, and basically, because I don't know what will happen musically if things are combined or made more intricate, or I would ask questions based on my what I don't know about music. And Martin would contribute ideas based on what he does know about music. And as you were saying, that turned out to be a very fruitful way of working. And we would ask the 3 artists to try and do the thing we would ask and see what was possible. And sometimes great things came out of it, like beautiful arrangements of songs, none of which I don't think from that first one are in the show. And lots of great conversation about their stories as singers and how they became singers and their challenges as singers, and great stories from the opera singer about the training for operatic singers, as you can imagine. It's extremely demanding and very harsh, or at least it used to be, like the traditions around how to manage an operatic voice, all of which was really fascinating about the voice. And part of what we also wanted to watch was how did those 3 people from different types of singing worlds work together? And we would like set them tasks and go to the piano and figure it out, and we would sit over here and watch and talk and listen, and then make proposals about things that we thought would generate new ideas. And then we just kept doing that. Every year or so we would get another group of artists together and continue that and slowly start to refine what was appearing before us, and well before we knew what the show was. But the exploration of all of these ideas was where we began.
That's beautiful.
It was fun, too.
Yeah. There was a fun nod, I think, on our first day of rehearsals. Martin had mentioned that Torian, an incredible singer that you're going to see today, was a student of yours. And so what has your relationship been? Because you also sing and perform in musically inclined theater pieces, too. What has your relationship been with the ensemble been like?
Well, I consider them peers in that sense. And, because I've been a singer, it's been part of my practice my whole life. And over the last 8 years, I've been an instructor of acting through song, as well as to collective and devised theater at Sheridan College in their well-known music theater program. So I've been encountering, well now over the years, I mean hundreds of young and up-and-coming artists. And that's been really inspiring to me. Generational, youthful energy and approaches to music, and a young voice. So again, you know, we've always had to, based on people's interest, availability, growth, and maturity over the years of workshopping and developing this, you know, we've had to mix up these trios, and it's a very intimate grouping of people, assemblage, the trio, you know. As we say, it's really the smallest possible group available, and because you know, a duo is 1 and 2. It's like a couple, and there's you know, so there's always that balance. But as you know, with three people, there's always a certain vulnerability and tenderness. It can be like, yeah, all for one and one for all, or it can be 2 against 1, or it can be, you know, that kind of thing. So it's been very interesting mixing people up. So we've had people come and go out of the project, including Kate Hennig, who loved the piece but couldn't continue. And an amazing associate artist that we've had here at the Tarragon for this production is a singer and actor and director named Tom Allison. And Tom Allison has an incredible career in the musical theater. And, you know, I mean, major Mervish productions and Broadway and all that kind of stuff, and has been doing that for decades, but has moved more and more into directing, and so sings less and less, you know, and this is partly by choice, partly by circumstance. So when Tom said, I love this project so much, and he'd already done 2 workshops with us, but I don't really have the time and space and capacity to continue as a singer-actor, but I want to stay involved. And so we had, this was the perfect trio. You know, this intimate group. It's so intimate. You know, it has to be the right group of people, you know, the right individuals that create something special. So we had to scratch our heads and go, well, if we want to continue developing this piece, we're going to have to find another singer. And bing, in my head just went one of my former students who was already by that point starting to have great success at the Shaw Festival. And this was Torian Tilak Singh, and had been a student of mine at Sheridan College and graduated in 2021. And I thought, well, not only does Torian have a vocal ability and sonority, sound, that's similar to Tom's, so if we bring him into this arrangements and the things that we've worked, I think his vocal instrument, Torian's vocal instrument, can match. But wouldn't it be interesting to bring in somebody young, like truly young and just starting out in the industry, you know, who I felt that I had a relationship with after instructing him as a student over 2 or 3 years. And it was pretty serendipitous. And then we brought him in, and Tom's been involved, you know, helping us. And so it's been fantastic to engage with another generation, you know, within our practice too.
It's beautiful. And it's a beautiful trio, you know, and I wanted to ask, how did the tasks or the experimentation of the workshop creation process build up towards rehearsals, towards the production, wrapping in design and the other elements to provide some sort of, you know, production consistencies to it? How did you build that into the rehearsal process? For the both of you.
Part of what we did over the many years that we were working on is each time we gathered the trio together, which whoever was in the trio, we would say to them, we would invite them to bring 2 or 3 songs in that they wanted, that they were willing, perhaps is a better way to put it, to teach to the other members of the trio. And so each time we gathered, you know, there's 3 of them, so that we each had to bring in 3 songs. So you each have 9 new pieces of material each time we got together. And also Martin and I would occasionally bring in pieces as well. So we might have, say, 12 new pieces each time we gathered, plus the ones from the previous iteration of gatherings, some of which we would go, oh, that's such an interesting song, let's continue to work on that. And some of which you would just release, right? Lots of great pieces of music, both musical theater pieces and pop music, etc. we worked on and then released. So that's probably, a lot of people ask how the music in the show kind of came together, and that's part of it. We just sort of carried forward this body of music. I have a stack of music like this that we've worked on over the years on this show, from all kind of genres and eras. And part of that also told us a lot about the people, like what music you bring in, how you teach it, told us a lot about them as individuals and showed us how they work together as a trio. So that's also partly how we created this environment that is sort of in the show now, where the show is sort of like a rehearsal that becomes a show. And part of our curiosity is we loved watching how artists sang together on a new piece, and then how they sought out new things in it. And so we would give them tasks while they were doing that. And out of that came a lot of ways of talking about the voice in the show, either their own stories, which you'll hear in the show, but how their voices evolved and how they were trained and the hurdles that they faced. And other ways, but a big priority of mine was how can we help an audience listen differently over the course of a show? So if we provide information about singing and we show different ways that they sing together, can we help you, as you experience the show, listen to them differently by the end? So that we can hear the component pieces of a trio, and by the end, when they sing fully as a trio again, are you hearing it differently? Let's see in a couple hours whether we got there or not. But I'm curious, as a non-singer who listens differently, I think, than musicians do or singers do, I want to get closer to how they hear music. And that was one of the devices, like how can we help unveil something about how voices and music is constructed to help us hear it more effectively. And as you can see, maybe you can see on the floor here, there's a device here that you'll see on the stage of the theater where well, I won't give it away, but anyway, we've taped it out here on the floor. But it's one of the tools we used, like how can we make music visible? How can we make this tool of a piano a component that non-pianists even can understand and appreciate? And so we tried to draw each time, capture some ways of unveiling how music works and functions and how the voice functions, and go, oh, how someone articulated, like Kate Hennig had studied voice for a while, so she had a really great way of talking about how the body makes sound. So we're like, those are great. And she had to step out of the project, but we kept the information that she shared with us and some of the ways that she articulated it and wove them into the show. Anyway, that's
beautiful. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to your question too, moving from kind of endless workshops to a production here at the Tarragon with, as you say, with designers and a stage manager and dramaturgs and all this kind of stuff. Oh Lord, the vibe is so great when you're exploring and throwing things together, and then you kind of ad hoc put something together, have an invited audience of people, and share the workshop, and it's all on its feet and very spontaneous, and that has a wonderful quality to it, and it's something that's very embedded in the aesthetic of the show. But it was one of my only anxieties coming into this, because it's such a creative room, it's such a supportive room, and it's been such wonderful exploration all the way through. But it was like, okay, how do we turn this into a show, a production? And so happy that the Tarragon Theatre programmed it in their season, but for decades known as the theatre of the well-made play. And as Brian and I like to joke, the phrase he came up with is like, well, now how do we make the well-made non-play? Because it's not narratively driven. It's not driven by plot and narrative and protagonists and antagonists and everything. So all the decisions around creating a cohesive production that is satisfying, both in terms of its technique and presentation and design, but also in terms of its thematic connections and its presence of the singer-actors on stage working through a journey, because there certainly is a journey and relationship and movement and all those things that are crucial to theatrical experience. But there's no plot or narrative, and it's like, okay, well, let's see what happens here. And so we continued developing and exploring and creating. We stayed with our process, just with some, different goals and prerogatives to make it arrive, you know, in a more in a fuller way, right?
Thank you, Martin.
You're welcome.
It was actually in one of Martin's peer research articles as well, or one of the quotes, where you mentioned that music by nature begs for a narrative. When you hear a piece of music, you naturally begin to align. And what I find so powerful in The Wolf is that you say that it's non-narrative, but actually every single one of you, you're going to experience your own narrative arc that you shape based on your life and the music and the voices you hear. So I think it's a beautiful offer. And also, along those, I wanted to bring up from your recent article from Peripety, The Flashes of Red, something that I so admire in Nightswimming and Brian and Martin and this show is the very generous questioning and look at disruption or interference. The wolf in the voice being the break. It's something that can cause great anxiety, but is also a very natural part of our human body, a very natural disruption that occurs to all of us. And in this article, Brian was looking at interference or disruption as a form of dramaturgy, of playmaking or creative collaboration. And so I quote, you already actually brought up this quote, as Martin and I developed Blue Notes, we had a mantra which was, let's not make it a play unless it wants to be a play. By that, we meant that we did not want to write a text-based, character-based, psychology-based script. And I see those remnants of what you were examining in Blue Notes making its way into Wolf in the Voice as well. And so I was curious, what other forms of interference or disruption or wolves in the voice did you find in the overall process as well? What other parts of creating this production did you interfere creatively with?
Ooh. That's a wolfy question.
I was just going to say that. That's the duet of us. I guess a relevant example of interference, without trying to give too much away about what happens in the show, because some of it is in there, is in a bunch of these shows that we've worked on, at least some of my interferences have been, as I'm listening to a show, we worked on a Baroque piece of music in one of our shows. It was a beautiful piece of Baroque music when we were working with 7 singers on it. And I would interfere with it in all sorts of ways. And we didn't know if we would use the song in the show or not, as it happened. But it was long enough, it was like maybe 10 minutes long. I don't know anyway, it was long enough that it was complex enough that I could make propositions like, okay, at bar 100, I would like everyone to switch to the alto line for 20 bars and then switch back to the soprano, tenor, alto bass lines without acknowledging just what happens when that happens. Like what happens when you highlight the alto line in a Baroque piece of music. And I love that sort of intervention because it taught me more about how that piece of music was constructed by the composer. Right. It taught me a lot about how singers navigate a task like that, which normally they're not asked to do, is what I learned. Oh, they're never asked to do that? That's interesting. And it taught me more about the alto line, but it also taught me more about the other parts, because by not hearing those other parts, I learned what they contributed to the whole. Mm-hmm. So that experiment we conducted on that Baroque piece, but also some other pieces over the years, because I found it really instructive to, again, listen in a different way to what is happening and ask singers to do something that they're normally not asked to do, which is sing other parts. So what happens when the sopranos all sing the alto line, and not just the sopranos, but the tenors and the bass too, but they all sing the alto line. Mm. What happens to the piece of music? How can they get back into it when that request is over? What is the navigation that they're being asked to do vocally, but also kind of artistically on a task like that, and to make it musical, and to try and make it part of a performance of the piece. So you'll see kind of some of the results of that sort of experiment in the show as we've created it today. But that sort of interference is exactly the sort of thing that I brought to one of the things I brought to the process. How can we disrupt something, learn about it, and look for information in that we can then apply to another experiment and another experiment and another experiment. And maybe some of those experiments will be so resonant and so interesting to watch and listen to that they'll get into the ultimate show. And some of them did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been important to invite accident into our process, and even to sustain some room for it in a fully realized production. Because so much of what dramaturgy and playmaking is often, it can be reduced to simply the positioning of information as we know it, and following normal grooves of narrative or cultural expectation and things like that. And so, I mean, one thing, even though there are pieces that many people would recognize and ones that will be new to other people, they're mostly kind of genre bending, like they're not arranged or presented in ways that are traditional. And so we've liked, I tend to think that audiences, certainly especially in work like this, which again is not strictly determined by narrative and character and plot and so on, that I think audiences, like watching eyes and listening ears, like to discover something rather than be shown something. So we do go to a lot of efforts to include information and structures that help us continue to be engaged in the material, but then also leaving a lot of room for this kind of ontological tension almost, the people in the room and what is unknown that might happen. And so the performers have to bring not just their professional selves, but their real selves, so that in some ways the vulnerability of the wolf in the voice and the potential for accident and error are also in tension in the room, and it kind of provides a vivid co-presence, which I find really important to the piece overall. So.
Thank you. I'm included in this show as well is just virtuosic singing, but mixed in with this exploration of placing these virtuosos into placements that might not be comfortable or where they naturally are asked to singing. And so keep your ears out. And it's also just such a personal look at their relationships with their voices, the disruption that occurs in the break, their navigation of that. And also, it also poses back out to our audience very generously, the disruption to you, to your lives. And so, as we come to closing our talk, I wanted to ask you both a more personal question of, how's your relationship with the wolf in your voice changed over the years? Where are you now with the wolf in your voice? And that can be your voice literally or
yes,
the
or
wolves in your
metaphorically.
lives.
And that is something thematic in the piece too. It's not just the vocal instrument where the wolf may live, you know.
Yeah.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, you know, my wolf, I started Mrs. Henderson's My Wolf, who told me something that she shouldn't have done, and probably did to lots of other students at my school way back. I've never, even despite all the shows I've done on singing over the years and my long-term fascination with it, I've still have not gotten over the wolf that she put on my voice.
Yeah.
And that's just true. I sing more, but I don't sing much outside of these works that we develop. And I still feel uncomfortable about it. And that's why I don't mind naming her, because she was a pretty nice teacher in every other way. But that was such an error on her part that I know she'd probably offer to other people. So that's real and ongoing and continuous for me, for sure, or just not continuous, but it's part of my life. I think the larger sense of wolf about fear or doubt or vulnerability or fragility, which is part of what we've explored through this, that it's a metaphor for those other things in our lives, because our voices are so tied to our identities. Like voice is is actually a synonym for identity, right? In English anyway. The theater making is a vulnerable craft, because we put our ideas out there all the time, and not just in front of you as audience members, although we do that too, but we do it all the time, in rehearsal, in workshop, when we're talking about a show, when we're trying to figure out what to do and why and how. And not every idea is great, and they're often discarded and rejected or discussed. And so managing that all the time is part of the work, at least in our field. And I think this show, by putting a name on it, has absolutely contributed something to my confidence and awareness of the challenge of doing that.
Thank you, Brian.
He's so articulate. Oh, goodness. I would say right here and right now, the wolf in my voice is the question, and it relates entirely to identity and history, is, will I ever get to sing again, professionally, in a show and so forth? Just because, my life and career has changed, and here I am, I'm always teaching young singers all the time, and working on shows like all the Nightswimming shows with Ryan. It's all about the voice, and I'm writing the book for a musical with some great collaborators right now, and I'm doing, dramaturgy and all this kind of stuff, and so I perform much less. And so just being in the room with these great singers and all these songs, viscerally, it awakens, I wouldn't say nostalgia, but a bit of an ache in me going, I want to be able to sing for people again with a group and show off that way and everything. And, I always love to mention when I'm in this room, and I'll just do it briefly, I did my very first professional musical at the age of 10 with a brand new theater company called Factory Theatre here in Toronto. And this was like a year before the Tarragon was forming at that time out of the factory. And the factory was just on DuPont there at the corner of Brunswick. And the building is still there. It's called Studio North, is whatever. And that's where the original Factory Theatre lab was. And they did a Christmas musical called Be Prepared, about Boy Scouts and Wolf Cubs and Girl Guides and everything. And I was cast as the head Wolf Cub. I was at a drama school, and I had a solo and everything. And that's where the bug got me. And so every day I'm walking past that building, coming here to rehearsal, and like, am I ever going to sing again like I did when I was 10? And so there's a lot of that is going on. So that feels very wolfy to me.
Thank you. Yeah. And then one last interference of that question is, the show itself will offer you such a look at all these questions and themes and music you're going to experience. But in this moment, with this group of audience and these community members, what's your hope for their relationship to their wolf and their voices?
Go, Brian.
Wow, small job for a show, but I hope it, I want the show, as I said, to help people listen differently, but also to listen to the music that they hear and watch and see and observe, but also maybe perhaps to themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so experiencing, and I think a number of us are, Jeff, here at the Tarragon and the preview audiences we had, the intimacy and the warmth and the invitation of the show to let it wash over you in a state of pleasure, but to also be engaged with the vulnerability of it, the intimacy of it, and just feels like this is something that we need so badly, so much in our current, state of the world and everything. It's important that theater be political, and it's also vital that some theater be great escapism and pure joy, and hopefully this is a balance of just experience, embodied experience in a room together, with stories and song, and it feels very necessary right now for so much of our art, I think. So hopefully we're helping to nurture that in the room.
I think you are. 100% agree.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you so much for being part of our Tarragon Talk. Enjoy this matinee performance of Wolf in the Voice. Thank you again for coming. Please join me in thanking both Martin and Brian.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.